all Barbadians, no matter where they're from, are able to live here and able to thrive. So thank you once again, and we'll get right into the opening panel discussion.
Thank you, Roshana. Hi, everyone. My name is Rianne Prescott, and I will be the moderator for our panel discussion this morning. Our panel discussion will be on the perspective of the impact of ageism. Now, I know Roshana defined what ageism is, but let me just define it again for us. So ageism is defined as a stereotype to how we think, prejudice how we feel, and discrimination how we act, directed towards others or oneself based on age. So before we get into it, let me introduce our esteemed panelists from how they're sitting. So we have Lou Lascari, who is a social media influencer and a digital media professional. We have Sarah Bisram, member of the Barbados National Youth Parliament and student at Harrison's College. We have David Johnson, the founder of Let's Unpack It, and Colby Brooms, the first Vice President of the Barbados Youth Development Council. Thank you so much for joining with us today. And before we start the discussion, I also want to say that the discussion doesn't end here. We have a poll with Barbados, and to join that poll and to give your perspective on ageism, all you have to do is message ageism to your report Barbados at 832-6775. That's 832-6775. Or you can DM ageism to your report Barbados on Twitter and Instagram. Now let's get into it. Okay. So when I hear ageism, I automatically think discrimination against older people. And automatically, that's a stereotype. So I want to know, how harmful is that thought process to young people within the Barbados society, and how dismissive is it? I'm going to pose that to you, Colby.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for all being here. Interesting question, Rihanna. I think ageism, when you said you think old people, but I also think young people as well. Especially in the workforce, and that is also a stereotype. As Roshana mentioned in her opening statement, sometimes it is that we say, well, these old people can't go down and let us get the jobs, we're coming out to UE and other universities, and, you feel as if, in a sense, they're holding you back. So I think of it from both sections, but when I was thinking about the theme for this year, because at first I was like, what is this theme? Right? That was my first question. I was like, what is this theme? But it forced you then to look at it a bit more and to examine your own, and to reflect on your own bias. And then you recognize, well, hey, maybe I'm being a bit ageist. And, when you look at a society as a whole, especially Barbados, where we had the village raising the community, our children, and you coming up, you find that when you have a society that doesn't have the input of both young and old people, you miss a bit from generational knowledge, from technological knowledge that may be coming up, and that in of itself may be a stereotype, but everybody has to come together because one hand cannot clap in order to make a wholesome society. So I think that overall, all of us have a responsibility to pay to ensure that everybody's view is respected.
Thank you. And further to that question, I just want to know, what steps can we take to build more awareness around this issue?
In terms of awareness, I would say the first thing is reflecting, because sometimes, as I said, even when I thought of this theme, I was like, what is going on here? So it starts with knowledge from yourself. It starts about actively seeking to know that there is a problem and try to rectify it. So I think, in short, that is all about knowledge, being self-aware. We like to say being woke. So it is about being woke about it and taking steps to kind of bridge that gap. Because again, older people can't do it by themselves and younger people can't do it by themselves. It takes both parties to come together to say, this is how we're going to address this.
I fully agree. Self-awareness is always the first step. Now, Luke, as a social media influencer and a digital media professional, so social media is always defined as the young people thing. And when you see older people on the apps, they're always like, what are they doing here? So taboo. But we also know that social media is a powerful mechanism to raise awareness on a lot of societal issues. So how can we find a middle ground to break that stigma so that social media can be a platform for all ages and to create that intergenerational dialogue?
I think that it is very important that we utilize social media to be able to connect to everybody, to bridge that gap, because I believe that social media is a very powerful tool that can be used to facilitate conversations between the age groups, between the older people and the younger people, in the same way that our society has transformed to allow social media apps like WhatsApp to be able to become a legitimate means of communication among people and businesses. The same way it could be used for other platforms, whether this be Facebook or Instagram, for people to connect and be able to bridge that gap. But I just think it needs to become taken more seriously by both parties, I would say, both older people and younger people, and understand what it can do and how it could facilitate these types of conversations.
Thank you. I totally agree. Especially when I see older people on TikTok, I get so happy. They teach me a lot. Okay, so David, ageism creates negative stereotypes that can have serious mental impacts on young people and their personal development. What can we do to raise more awareness on this issue, and where people can feel more safe to speak about it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The issue of vulnerability is one that our society has not really addressed. I'm sure that if I ask most young people here if they feel comfortable in discussing certain issues as it relates to their mental health, even with their peers, that becomes a challenge. I think number one is really prioritizing mental health. That's a conversation that we need to have as a nation. It's not just amongst young people or just amongst older generations. That's number one. The second thing is the concept of care. I think for a lot of us, we've kind of abandoned that. We have forgotten that everyone has to care. That we've forgotten that there is a meaning behind community. It's not just about organizing yourself in a neighborhood, but actually contributing to the development of everyone in that neighborhood. And so I think if we recognize that everybody has a part to play, that certainly helps. But in terms of what are the actual harms of ageism as it comes to mental health, I think, yes, the idea of vulnerability in that young people are not going to feel comfortable speaking to people who do not recognize that young people do have issues. I think if we get to the root of the idea of mental health awareness and realizing that we all have mental health, it's a state of well-being where we can all cope with stress, where we can work productively, and where we can engage each other in fruitful relationships. That's the basic essence of what mental health is. If we are still stigmatizing that, then we're still going to have a great challenge in having these conversations anyways. But beyond that, in terms of activating help seeking, ageism is a big hindrance to that. Because the people who I'm supposed to rely on for support, for guidance, the people who've been through this before, and whether or not they want to admit that they have struggled with mental illness or mental health challenges, they're the persons who should be able to support us and guide us and say, well, hey, I've been through this, these are the steps that I took. But if we have separated ourselves as a society into older generation and younger generation, the idea of solidarity can't exist. The idea of caring for one another becomes challenged, and therefore we're not able to address mental health challenges, particularly amongst younger people. Then, of course, we know that this also affects older people. When they feel as though, you know, I've gotten over the threshold of 60 years old and now I'm no longer a contributing member of the society, that leads to feelings of loneliness. It leads to hopelessness. And the statistics show us that it also is linked to premature death. So there is a direct correlation in terms of both your physical health and your mental health. And just as a challenge to everyone, again, stats show every second person is ageist. So if we divulge into this conversation about, oh, we are casting blame on the older generation, young people, oh, we're here and it's them. Older people, with these young people so radical, you know, they're irresponsible, they're so naive. We are hindering that level of conversation happening amongst each other and between the generations. So I think these are some of the things that we need to reflect on if we're going to make a positive difference in terms of identifying that mental health is a priority for all, but also addressing ageism at its root. I believe all of us at some point hold these kind of ageist attitudes, and I frequently have to check myself. So, yeah.
I agree. I had to check myself when I was Googling about the topic because I was like, ageism equals to old people. And I agree with everything you were saying as well. And it also goes back to Kobe's point where we were talking about it all starts with being self-aware. Like knowing that you are also part of that problem. So, Sarah, like as a teenager, and you hear statements like, you're too young to understand, or you're actually smart for your age, like, how can these statements like hinder your development and hinder you actually like wanting to go after your goals?
I think sometimes for me, hearing things like the youngest person to do whatever, that can seem inspirational. But I think the problem lies, when you say something like, oh, you're smart for your age, it almost seems like it's there to like discredit your hard work, which is not good at all, because it's like there's a lack of trust, I feel like, between different groups in society, older people, younger people, and that helps to broaden that. And so when you are ready to take up your space and you get into these spaces, it doesn't feel safe, and then you also become overly critical of yourself because you're aware that your identity has already been stereotyped, and that is in the back of your mind as you speak all the time, and you're not able to truly express yourself to the best of your ability. I personally have not experienced much ageism. I've heard wait, but I think that it's been helpful because it's not been wait until you're older. It's been, here are the tools to help you so that when you're ready to take up space, you can do so credibly, not necessarily 10 years from now. You can be ready as soon as you have all the tools, because I think it's important to recognize that you do have to know your stuff in order to make an impact. You do have to go through that process and take that time. But even like the Youth Parliament doing their debate on anti-violence, I think that's taken up space. But also prior to that, we were giving the tools. So if more young people can have that kind of environment where they are given the tools and are in safe spaces, I think we can help build a trust, a mutual trust and credibility amongst everyone. And these negative impacts will not be as detrimental to collaboration.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Okay, so we're going to get a little personal. I want to know, everyone, okay, where do you notice ageism the most? Have you felt or have you been a victim of ageism? And how have you dealt with it? We'll start with Luke.
Yeah, so I'm young. So yeah, I absolutely have been a victim of ageism, because we are, as young people, you're constantly told that you need to wait. Like there's something coming, you need to wait your time, you need to, you know, like go through the ropes. And then we see a lot of ideas die as young people, things that we want, change that we push for. And then you try to go through the right channels, and you've had doors closed in your face simply just because you're seen as too young. You can't effect any change. You can't bring any level of any type of ideas to the organization, or you can't bring any type of social change. So in wide ways, I've seen both personally and, like, as you say, you trying to make a change in the nation, like, okay, you are too young. You need to sit down and wait. You need to bide your time. You need to go through your own process. So yes, I would say I face ageism, but I've also seen it, just as both David and Komi said, like, you need to have that self-reflection. So I would see it among my peers too as well, where they'd be like, oh, these old people need to die off. And it's like, that's a bit harsh. So yeah, I have faced it, but I have seen it amongst my own community too as well.
And how have you dealt with it?
That is a tough one. Yeah, because you feel powerless in the face of ageism, especially as a younger person. It's like, well, there's nowhere to go. So when I was younger, I was told, like, you know, these ideas are too radical, you doing too much. It's like, maybe if I go through the appropriate channels. And then you go through the appropriate channels, and it's like, well, you're still too young, you know, you need to bide your time, you need to come up through the things, you're too young, this can't happen now, that type of way. So it does feel limiting, it gives rise to a feeling of powerlessness, it gives rise to, like, there's no more opportunity, and because it's like, how much more time am I supposed to wait? So yes, it is a challenge to deal with, and that's why I think it's important to have these conversations to push to understand that these limits and these ways to restrict young people they don't benefit the society, because there's an input that young people need to have within society, within organizations, because they can push things to be better or push things to move forward. And it doesn't need to be like, oh, you're too young to speak, or you're too young to have an opinion, or you're too young to have an idea. So I think that these conversations, like I said, are very necessary, because they help to move the needle and help people understand, okay, these young people do have ideas, and I should be able to give them space to push forward these ideas and take these ideas on board, and not just immediately discard it just because I see them as too young.
Lovely. I also wanted to add to your point when you were saying, when people keep telling us, wait. And I know, you're supposed to be patient, but I feel like everybody has a gut feeling. And okay, I can wait, but it's also I know it's my time. I know I'm going to do it. So it's also being confident in yourself to know, yeah, they're telling me wait, but no, I got this. To you, Sarah.
Yeah, in regards to dealing with ageism, I think everybody's kind of touched on it. I think you need to recognize the need for your voice and not think that it's, oh, you have to wait. Because I think if the goal is overall to create and craft a world that is enjoyed by everyone, then we need to seek out all these differing perspectives, because that's the best way to get the closest to that. And if you can understand that you have a different perspective to add, and it will be beneficial to a big group, because also we're not homogenous. Everybody doesn't think the same way. Everybody doesn't have the same views. So if you can offer your perspective, then we can get closer to creating a world that can be enjoyed by all. Because not only do you need to be heard, somebody needs to listen and integrate what you've said into decision making. So you have to make sure that you recognize the need of your voice, and the society as a whole needs to recognize the need for everyone's voice, or we're all going to lose. So I think that is important to remember that, and that is what keeps me motivated personally, to know that my voice is also important.
Have you experienced personally any type of ageism as the youngest person on the panel?
In the spaces that I've been a part of, like this space as well, I feel like it's safe and comfortable. And I'm not sure if, as I get older and start speaking in other spaces where it's not surrounded by the youth, if I'll start to feel that. But I've had a positive experience so far. And I do know that I'm privileged to say that. And I hope that more young people will be able to have the same opportunities I have to feel safe speaking out in spaces.
That answer makes me feel very a little confident, confident. But I also wanted to add to your point when you were talking about, listening, because I feel like there's listening and then there's listening to understand. And I think that's what we need more of, listening to understanding our young people and our people on the whole. David, your turn.
I just want to piggyback of what Sarah would have mentioned just now about this idea of finding one's own voice. And just to say that this is what ageism does. When society tells you one thing, it reinforces your internal narrative. And so it becomes very difficult to do, for the average person to do what Sarah is explaining about, having to sit down and find that own voice against a force that is so strong, that is constantly showing you that is not the case. And so one of the challenges that I have experienced, and this is being very transparent, as a very firm person in certain positions, I have incredible confidence in what I believe in, what are my principles and my values. Of course, when that is put against my parent who's come from a different generation, and we have to have these conversations, especially when I cross that age, that teenage section where I was like, okay, well, I don't necessarily agree with you on this. And so having to navigate those conversations was rather difficult for me, especially since I was in debating society. That did not bode well. So I think what that allowed me to do is to develop a level of patience. I was not very well known for my patience. But I think that's where we need to go. I think we need to have these kind of conversations, although they're uncomfortable, although sometimes they get strained, although you may have to walk away and say, okay, let me cool off a little bit and come back to the conversation. That's one element. Secondly, in my exposure to the medical field, There's ageism prevalent there. In Barbados, we have an issue where when a person gets a certain age, the first idea is to put them in a home. Or when they get sick, you leave them at the hospital and you abandon them. That's a problem. And you can see how that affects one's quality of life. And so we have older people who would be able to otherwise offer incredible contributions to debates, to the society, to young people even. But their quality of life is deteriorating on account of the fact of ageism. And of course, thirdly, my passion area of mental health is a critical area where we see ageism. And that is actually what essentially pushed me to found Let's Unpack It. The reality is that for young people, there was never really a safe space for them to speak about these topics. They can't speak to their parents about it on account of their parents may not understand. They can't speak to their grandparents about it because what is mental health? Well, I went through all this and I went to school and I had on the shoes and I had the problems. I turned out fine. But yeah, we have more knowledge now. Yeah, we have an understanding that there's a different way to do things. There's a different way to approach mental health. There are coping mechanisms that we can teach people. And so I think the more that we recognize that, the more that we're able to deal with it at its root. And so what my advice to any young person who is struggling with this idea right now, whether it's at the individual level with your parent, within your family, even as young people vie for leadership positions and they have to deal with the idea that, you know, well, you're too young to be in parliament. You're too young to be a leader of this organization. You're too young to found your own organization. I invite you to challenge that, to stand up and say, well, hey, no, I'm going to do this. And it's not about proving a point to anybody. It's not necessarily with an expectation that you are fundamentally going to change everybody's opinion, but it needs to start within. It needs to be what Sarah is talking about, recognizing your voice, recognizing your potential, and hopefully inspiring other young people. And I feel as the more we stand up, the more we have conversations like these, the more that we confront ageism directly and we engage people from all generations, I believe that we can make positive change on this matter.
Well, you left me a little speechless just now. Like, even your points on ageism and in the medical field, that was a very enlightening point because sometimes we don't even think that so far out. And even your points are very relatable to me because I have that same issue with, you know, having to hold my tongue or like having to be, knowing something that I want, being so determined, or like having a parent tell me, oh, you're too young, don't do this, do that. But then knowing within yourself, like, I can do that. So I'm very related to that. Here, go ahead.
Where do you want me to start, Rian? Everything. We have all day?
We have all the time.
So I would say definitely ageism. For me, I've experienced it almost everything that I do. From career-wise, I've gotten to the point in interviews that I have taken my date of birth off my CV and I divert from questions about age. Because people say, yeah, man, you sound knowledgeable. You say, but how old are you? Mm-hmm. And I said 23, and they're like, oh, I thought you was like 30. I was like, no. And then the conversation then switches into a different direction. So I've stopped telling people my age. In terms of like, when even like at work where you have to maybe supervise other persons, if you find that you have somebody, I maybe have to supervise someone who's like my mom's age. And for the time they figure out that I was younger, it was like, it was a different type of experience. So I would say professionally, I experienced ageism. I'm young and I'm married. So from there too, it was like, oh, you're so young to be married. You get all of those questions. People say, I knew all the time, so it don't feel weird. Like, so I would say both professionally and personally, I've seen ageism in its full force. And how I overcome it, as I told you, with professionally, I just don't talk about my age anymore. And if it comes up, you would see it when you run in my chat, if you understand what I mean. When you ask for that type of information, or personally, I just probably just wouldn't bring it up, or just, so my way of coping with it may not be the best way, so I may not advise other persons to do it, but given my experiences so far, that has been it. And from the other side, as David rightfully mentioned, in terms of for older persons as well, you see it in how people do things and how people interact with older persons as well, putting them in homes, leaving them, those different things. And as David rightfully mentioned, in terms of the medical field, I remember I had to do a doctor appointment, and I saw this young person come in, and it was like, you just graduated from school, right? And I said to myself, but Kobe, if you want other people to take you seriously, you can't be saying, well, wait, this is like, there's a green doctor here. So, you know, sometimes you actually have to be very conscious, because we've come up in a society that has become so normal. Like, it's only now that we're having these conversations about it that we've put like a name to it, that you really start to understand how ageism works. And as I said in my opening statements, you really have to be woke about it and to be very conscious on how you're going to address it personally before you can, you know, bring other people along.
I hope we get to the point where you can put your age on your CV and not feel bad about it, because it is saddening that you work so hard and you have all this experience to show, but because you're not in the age group, you can't do it. And personally, I've had that in terms of I couldn't apply to a job because they had, you know, an age limit. I was too young. And I found that it was very disheartening, because I know I could do the job, but a few numbers and I couldn't. So I hope we get to that stage, because it's ridiculous. It is. But I want to end, you know, with, you know, more visions of what we can do, you know, the society that we would want to see. So starting again, Luke, if we had a fully age-inclusive culture, you know, what kind of progress do you see within our society? Like, if ageism was not really a thing anymore, you know, what kind of Barbados would we be able to have?
I think we'd be able to have a lot more progressive society, a lot more radical, and it would include a lot more youth voices, I too believe, because especially within the political sphere, we see people who are now getting access to power, who were in the game from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, now all these years later, now bringing those ideas, which are now old. Mm-hmm. So if we had more younger people able to have access to power, then maybe, hopefully, we could have more progressive reforms, different change. But within the society as a whole, I think it will be a lot more inclusive to have a lot of younger voices. And on the other end, we wouldn't be so quick to discard older people, and that once they've reached past, I don't know, 70, that you'll be willing to put them out to pasture, that you're pushing them in the grave, 1 foot in the grave type of thing, and that ideas and that experience within a role is gone, and that you just want to push out everything all for something new. So I think holistically that it would be a better society. I mean, that you'll be more inclusive. Mm-hmm. It'd be, as you say, you'll be able to bridge the gap. You'll be able to talk to all people. You get ideas from different areas and understanding, because sometimes we might have new ideas, but the person with the experience will be able to say, okay, we tried this already, and this didn't work. Or we tried this from this angle. Maybe you could conceptualize it from a different angle, because this is the result that we had. So, yeah, overall, I'd say I would believe it would be a better society. And as we can have younger people in leadership roles, we can have younger people doing different things, we can have younger people heading corporations and taking them in different directions. So, yeah, it would be a plus.
I completely agree.
I think if ageism was not a thing, I think we'd have a society that trusted each other more. And I'm actually quite disheartened, because when I'm hearing everyone speak, it seems as if these safe spaces that I've been a part of, after I graduate out of them, when I go to apply for my jobs, when I go to do this, when I go to do that, it's almost like that kind of disappears. So we want to hear you until, and then you have to start again, which I think, yeah, we can't continue to operate for that if we want to listen and integrate everyone into decision making. So I think if we did not exist in a society that had ageism, then we'd be able to unapologetically take up space. And I think that's very important. because being silenced is not beneficial to anyone at all, and we're not creating the world that we would want. It's almost like if we're existing in a, it's good enough for now, and then when it's your turn, you can change it if you want, instead of recognizing that everybody has wants, everybody has needs, and we need to take all of that into consideration. So we'd be in a society that trusts each other more, understands that everybody can be credible, whether or not you're young or old, and I think it would be a good place to operate, and I hope that I will have the opportunity to operate in a space like that and not experience, I hope I can still operate in my little bubble of I'm young, it's fun, I have safe spaces. I hope that that can become a norm and not necessarily a, yeah.
I want that for you too. We all do.
Definitely, Sarah. I definitely want to live in a world like that. I think fundamentally, ageism robs us of solidarity, and so that's why the theme is so apt. Solidarity in the sense that everyone can coexist, that everyone feels heard, understood, seen, cared for, and catered to. I think a world where ageism doesn't exist is a world where young people are fit for leadership on the premise of what they have done in terms of working towards a goal rather than their maturity. This arbitrary value that we attach to an age. I walk into rooms and I speak, and when I leave, people are like, oh, you're only 23. And so I feel what you're talking about, Sarah, as if, oh, well, okay, well, you're not welcome back next time because you're too young, you know? So I think a world where ageism doesn't exist is one where we can live in harmony, one where young people are not just an afterthought, one where when young people, as they do now, make up a significant portion of the population, that you come to them when you're making plans, that they are a designated stakeholder, and when we talk about things such as the discussions that we're having now about NIS, which will impact us as young people in a couple of years, that you don't wait to say, well, come to the town hall, that's all right. No, invite us to the table. I see a world, Barbados, where the Barbados Youth Development Council and the National Youth Parliament are not just debating societies, are not just leading social media campaigns, but are actually a part of the political structure and where they can be engaged because they represent the youth voice. And I think if we have that, then young people will feel as though they're a part of the process. They will start to care more, and we will benefit from that engagement, both from a place of maturity in the sense of older people having experienced a bunch, but also in the sense that young people are bringing their novel ideas, their access to knowledge, their technological capabilities. And when we get that mix, I believe that there's nothing that, as an island, as a nation, we would not be able to achieve. So, yeah, very aspirational, but I feel very doable if we're committed to it. Yeah.
I believe so too.
Just following on with everybody, I'm going to be a bit brief because they covered a lot of it. But I would say in terms of a society that doesn't focus on ageism, we wouldn't have, especially for Barbados, we wouldn't have had a 2-week debate on if we should have an 18-year-old senator. Those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about. That shouldn't be a novel idea. That should be the norm. It shouldn't be, you should have to wait and bide your time to be a part of a political structure. It shouldn't be, the Prime Minister of Grenada is only 45 years old. Those things, because we live in a society where young people can take up those spaces, and we live in a society where older persons as well can also be in those spaces, and you don't have to feel as if, I have to wait my time, I have to, bite my lip to wait until I get into those positions to do things. So I think that if we look at it holistically, if we can, both generations in a sense, young and old, sit together and to be able to say, this is a society that we want where all of us can be collaborative. And I think it comes back down to that collaboration where two hands can clap. We will be unstoppable. So it basically comes down to us all making that conscious decision and being respectful of each other and what everybody can bring to the table, because where we may have ideas, other persons may have institutional knowledge, and that is something that is extremely important, where you can have those merging of the minds as opposed to your way or my way, but we can meet in the center. And even though that's very aspirational, I think we have the ability to do it. So in a society, that is our, what we call the sweet spot, where we can have old and young come together, have that collaboration for the betterment of the country.
And it's that aspiration that's going to keep us motivated. Because once we lose that, But this discussion was so insightful, and the different perspectives that y'all brought really unpacked this topic of ageism. Y'all were a great panel, honestly. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you everybody for tuning in person, online. And I just want to say that before we go, is that you all can all be part of this conversation. It is not in here. All you have to do is take the U-Report poll. Message ageism to 832-6775 or DM ageism to U-Report Barbados on Instagram and Twitter, so we can keep this conversation moving and we can actually find, and not find because we already have solutions, but we can actually use these solutions to help with this ageism issue that we're having. So thank you, everybody. No, Andre? Okay, so I'll just close for everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I know that today didn't go as we expected, but you know what? We can look forward to part 2, where we can have a full discussion among ourselves, where we have more participants. But we had a panel discussion this morning, and it gives us something to piggyback on when we actually do have our group work. So please remember everything that was said this morning, because it was insightful and it was important and it was what we need. So I will close us off. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to more discussions like this.
Definitely, Rian. And just to let everybody know, lunch is on the way. We have a bit of time before that gets here, so
How was your morning?
It was going good and all. The rain is falling, so you know that's always a good place to put your mood in, and everything's going good. I had an intergenerational conversation, so I believe this is the first step, you know, to pushing our agenda forward.
What I will ask though is, let's get everybody talking. I know that each person from each table had, a topic or something that they were supposed to talk about. No one's looking at me because nobody wants to talk to me. How very, very rude. I'm a very nice person. And I think that, can y'all just tell us like what the topics that your table had, if anybody wants to start? We're not going to discuss it. I just want to know like what's the different topics so that we could like prepare ourselves for the next session. Yeah.